poor black janitor solved in 1 minute what 20 engineers failed. Then the millionaire CEO did this. Angela Davis was used to being invisible. Every morning before sunrise, she slipped into the towering headquarters of Blue Wave Technologies, mop and cleaning cart in hand, moving silently through glass-walled hallways where fortunes were made and futures decided. Most executives barely noticed her. To them, she was part of the background, someone who polished floors and emptied bins while they talked mergers and millions. But for Angela, this job was survival. She worked long hours to support her teenage son and her aging mother, holding on to the belief that dignity comes not from titles but from persistence. Blue Wave was not just another company. In the tech circles of Chicago, it was a rising star, known for ambitious projects and bold promises. Yet beneath its glossy exterior lay tension. The company was bleeding money from a technical flaw no one seemed able to fix. Over 3 months, losses mounted into the millions, and pressure pressed down on every department. Inside the boardroom, frustration often boiled over into shouting matches, especially under the direction of Andrew Mitchell, the firm's lead technical director. He was tall, sharp-suited, and quick-tempered, someone who had built his reputation on intimidating others into silence. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Andrew saw himself as untouchable. His word was law in the engineering division, and few dared to challenge him. Behind his polished veneer, though, was an arrogance that often slipped into disdain. Younger employees whispered about his biting remarks, especially toward women and minorities, but no one had ever dared to confront him directly. Angela had watched it all quietly as she polished the very conference tables where Andrew belittled his staff. For years, she had endured the subtle looks, the patronizing comments, the way people avoided eye contact with her as if her uniform made her less human. Yet Angela carried something most of them never suspected: a deep love for numbers. In her younger years, before life had pulled her into survival mode, she had studied mathematics with a hunger that set her apart. Circumstances had stolen her chance to finish college, but not her ability. Numbers, she often thought, had no prejudice. They simply demanded understanding. It was in this environment, between gleaming computer screens and whispered complaints, that Angela's quiet world collided with a problem that 20 trained engineers could not solve. Blue Wave's flaw had become a crisis. The technical teams worked late nights, their coffee cups piling high, their eyes hollow from exhaustion. Board members grew restless. Rumors spread through the cafeteria about contracts at risk and clients preparing to walk away. Every failed attempt raised the stakes. Angela noticed everything. The equations were scribbled on whiteboards as she wiped them down. The frustration in the engineers' voices as she emptied trash. The unsolved formula was left half-erased after another failed attempt. To her, it wasn't just random symbols. It was a puzzle waiting to be unlocked. Her life outside Blue Wave was simpler but no less demanding. She returned each night to a modest apartment on the south side of Chicago, where her son, Daniel, worked through his high school assignments and her mother rested in a worn recliner. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, each one demanding what little she earned. Still, Angela never complained. She cooked meals from scratch, stretched every dollar, and reminded Daniel daily that no hardship should define who he could become. At Blue Wave, however, the imbalance between her reality and the gleaming corporate world was impossible to ignore. Every day, she saw millionaires glide past her in tailored suits, speaking of deals worth more than she could imagine earning in a lifetime. Yet it wasn't envy that stirred in her. It was determination. She told herself quietly that her life had meaning, even if others overlooked it. What Angela couldn't have predicted was how quickly her unassuming role would be transformed into the center of a storm. The moment was coming when the invisible janitor would be forced into the spotlight, not by choice but by brilliance. And when it happened, the reaction wouldn't be celebration. It would unleash a fury of prejudice, humiliation, and revenge that would test the limits of her endurance. The stage was set. The company was desperate. Andrew Mitchell was restless and on edge. And Angela, still unseen by most, was about to step into a moment that would not only change her life but also shake Blue Wave Technologies to its very core. Would the world accept the truth when it came from the one person they least expected? Or would arrogance and racism attempt to bury a discovery that could save millions? The answers waited just beyond the glass walls of that boardroom. And soon, Angela Davis would find herself in the center of a fight that was bigger than any equation. Angela's brilliance should have been the turning point. When she solved the equation that had tormented 20 engineers, she expected maybe a nod of acknowledgement, perhaps a quick word of thanks. Instead, the boardroom fell silent. Andrew Mitchell's face twisted, not with admiration but with contempt. He sneered as though her insight had threatened his very identity. To him, the idea that a janitor, let alone a black woman with no degree, no title, no power, had succeeded where his team failed was unbearable. His words cut deep, laced with arrogance, as he dismissed her contribution. The humiliation in his tone was meant to reduce her back to the margins. From that day on, Andrew made her his target. What began as subtle slights quickly escalated into open hostility. He reassigned her cleaning schedule, forcing her into the most degrading tasks. Restrooms became her permanent station. Spilled coffee appeared suspiciously often in her path, as if accidents were staged. In the cafeteria, his mocking laughter carried across the room, loud enough for colleagues to hear. Clients witnessed his jabs, and employees sat frozen, too afraid to intervene. Angela endured it all in silence, though every insult left its mark. She refused to retaliate outwardly, but quietly, she began to build her defense. Every cutting remark, every cruel email, every inappropriate word, Angela saved them. She became meticulous, keeping copies, recordings, and notes. It was a slow, deliberate gathering of proof, stretching over 4 years, until her file had grown thick with undeniable evidence of racism and harassment. The breaking point came one midweek afternoon. Andrew sent an all-staff email to 62 employees. On the surface, it looked like another routine announcement. But buried within his words was a poison no one could ignore. "Not everyone is capable of contributing to technical work," he wrote. "Some should accept their natural limitations." Every reader understood who he meant. Angela's name wasn't there, but the implication was crystal clear. Whispers filled the office. Some shook their heads, others avoided eye contact, but all of them knew. Angela did not waste time. She forwarded the email to her trusted friend, Sophia Lynn, a sharp-minded lawyer with a reputation for dismantling corporate giants. Sophia had graduated at the top of her class at Harvard and had built her career protecting workers who had been silenced. When she read Andrew's email, she knew immediately. This was more than discrimination. It was a case waiting to explode. But fate gave Angela even more leverage. The following Thursday, while tidying an office, she noticed Andrew had left his system login open. Curiosity turned to shock as she uncovered private HR notes he had been keeping for years. The words on the screen were venomous, each entry dripping with bias. Marcus Brown, typical lazy black. Isabella Lopez, too sharp for a Latina. About Angela herself, dangerous arrogance for a woman with a mop. It was all there, unfiltered, damning. Angela copied the files, securing them far from Blue Wave servers. Andrew, unaware of the storm building around him, pressed harder. He called Angela into his office the very next day. His tone was smug, almost gleeful, as he told her she would be terminated by Monday. "You'll go back to scrubbing floors where you belong," he said. He didn't know she had a recorder in her pocket, capturing every word, every sneer. That moment, meant to break her, gave her the final piece of the puzzle. Angela knew what was coming, but she played her role carefully. On Monday morning, the company auditorium was packed. Staff gathered, whispers echoing off the walls, as Andrew strode to the stage with the air of a man about to cement his power. In front of dozens, he announced Angela's firing. The words insubordination echoed like a verdict. Angela did not argue. She simply thanked him and walked away, leaving behind an unease that rippled through the room. What no one knew was that the microphones had captured his every word, another thread in the growing web of evidence. By the next morning, the story had escaped Blue Wave's walls. National headlines blared, "Janitor fired after solving problem that saved company millions." Talk shows picked up the story, sparking heated debates on systemic racism in corporate America. Outside the company's headquarters, reporters gathered. Within hours, 3 of Blue Wave's largest clients severed ties, tearing nearly $95 million out of the company's accounts. Inside, chaos reigned. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Employees whispered in corridors, unsure of where their loyalty should lie. And at the center of it all stood Angela, calm and composed, while Andrew's control slipped through his fingers. The rising tide reached its peak when Sophia Lynn walked through the lobby, lawsuit in hand, cameras trailing behind her. She presented the case in full view of employees and press alike. Racial discrimination, wrongful termination, harassment. The weight of years of evidence now bore down on Andrew Mitchell. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. And yet, the story was not finished. Blue Wave's millionaire CEO, William Huang, had to choose between protecting a longtime director or salvaging the company's reputation. What he decided next would not only change Angela's life, it would determine whether Blue Wave survived at all. The walls of power that had once seemed impenetrable were cracking. Angela's quiet resistance had become unstoppable momentum. But just as the world began to take her side, the question lingered. Would justice truly prevail, or would the system once again bury the truth beneath influence and wealth? The answer was about to unfold in the most public, devastating way. The auditorium at Blue Wave was packed once again, but this time the energy was different. The week before, it had been quiet discomfort, hushed whispers, and the smug certainty of a man who thought he had crushed someone beneath his heel. Now it was chaos. Reporters had somehow slipped inside. Cameras clicked. Employees leaned forward in their seats, their eyes darting between the CEO, the lawyers, and Andrew Mitchell, who looked far less confident than usual. The walls of glass that had once signified progress and innovation now reflected panic. It began with Sophia Lynn's voice, firm and deliberate, echoing through the room as she read the charges. Her words sliced through the air. Racial discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination. Each phrase landed like a blow, exposing the underbelly of Blue Wave in front of the very people who had once ignored whispers in hallways. Angela stood behind her lawyer, steady but silent, her face calm while her heart raced. For years, she had endured the humiliation quietly. Now, the evidence of every insult, every recorded word, every hateful email was laid bare for all to see. Andrew tried to laugh it off. He leaned against the podium with a smirk, waving his hand as though Sophia's accusations were nothing more than theatrics. But then the files appeared. Screens flickered to life, displaying the words he had written in secret. Marcus Brown, typical lazy black. Isabella Lopez, too sharp for a Latina. Dangerous arrogance for a woman with a mop. Gasps rippled across the audience. Employees turned to each other, their faces pale, as they realized the extent of his cruelty. There was no denying it now. The moment that broke him came seconds later. A recording played, Andrew's own voice echoing through the speakers. It was the meeting in his office, where he had told Angela she would be going back to scrubbing floors where she belonged. The venom in his tone reverberated through the room. There was no spin, no explanation that could erase the truth. He had condemned himself in his own words. William Huang, the millionaire CEO, stepped forward. His face was unreadable, his reputation suddenly on the line. The entire company watched for his reaction, waiting to see whether he would protect his longtime technical director or choose the future of Blue Wave. With a voice that carried both authority and finality, he announced Andrew's immediate termination. The words sent a shockwave through the auditorium. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Two employees Andrew had long belittled, Isabella Lopez and Marcus Brown, stood up. For years, they had carried the scars of his remarks in silence. Now, under the glare of cameras, they confronted him directly. Their voices trembled not with fear but with fury, telling him how his prejudice had cost them opportunities, promotions, and dignity. The confrontation was raw, unscripted, and devastating. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some crying. As the truth finally spilled into the open, Andrew's face turned ashen. His arrogance evaporated as reporters surged forward, their microphones extended, their questions relentless. For the first time, the man who had wielded fear like a weapon stood defenseless. He pushed past them, trying to escape, but there was no way out. His walk through the lobby felt like a public trial, each flash of a camera another blow to his once impenetrable ego. By the time he reached the glass doors, employees were cheering his exit. The power he had clung to for decades was gone, ripped away in a single unforgettable moment. Yet for Angela, the climax was not about his downfall. It was about the validation of her struggle. She watched as the empire he had built on intimidation and arrogance crumbled before her eyes. The company that had once ignored her now turned its gaze fully on her story. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the janitor. Still, beneath the victory, Angela felt the weight of the fight that lay ahead. Lawsuits, investigations, federal scrutiny, all of it would stretch on for months, maybe years. Blue Wave itself teetered on collapse, contracts already slipping away in the wake of the scandal. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was preparing a full-scale probe. The headlines showed no sign of slowing, and Angela's name was being discussed in living rooms and boardrooms across the nation. As she left the building that day, cameras swarmed around her, voices calling out questions she didn't yet have answers for. Reporters shouted about settlements, leadership roles, and what would come next. Angela simply walked forward, her chin lifted, her silence louder than words. In her pocket was the recorder that had changed everything, a simple device that had turned private cruelty into public evidence. For Andrew, the climax was ruin. For Angela, it was a transformation. But for everyone watching, it was a reckoning. The image of a janitor outsmarting 20 engineers, enduring years of abuse, and finally standing at the center of justice was unforgettable. The story wasn't finished. The fallout would stretch far beyond Blue Wave's walls. And as the cameras followed Angela into the bright Chicago afternoon, the world was left to wonder. Would her victory be enough to change a system built to silence voices like hers? Or was this only the beginning of a much larger fight? One thing was certain, nothing at Blue Wave Technologies would ever be the same again. In the weeks that followed Andrew Mitchell's fall, Blue Wave Technologies transformed from a rising star in the tech world into a cautionary tale plastered across headlines. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission announced a federal investigation, and with it came a flood of former employees who had once stayed silent. More than 10 came forward, each with their own story of Andrew's cruelty. Missed promotions, sabotaged careers, and years of quiet suffering under his authority. The image of Blue Wave as a forward-thinking company cracked apart, replaced by a narrative of arrogance, racism, and failure. For Angela Davis, the storm was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside her building, neighbors whispered with pride, and strangers stopped her in grocery stores to thank her for her courage. First, she found it surreal. For so long, she had been unseen, walking through halls where no one bothered to learn her name. Now, her story was shaping national conversations about race and power in corporate America. The legal case moved quickly, fueled by irrefutable evidence. Andrew's emails, recordings, and personal notes left no room for doubt. When the settlement was finalized, Angela received $3 million. But money was never the victory she sought. What mattered most was what came after. The unexpected offer from Blue Wave's shaken leadership to step into the role of Director of Innovation. Some wondered why she would accept. Why work for a company that had allowed such abuse for years? But Angela saw something larger than herself. She knew her presence at the table was not just symbolic. It was an opportunity to rewrite the culture from within. With her new authority, she created scholarship programs for underrepresented students in STEM, mentoring networks for women and minorities, and new HR policies that demanded accountability at every level. The changes did not erase the past, but they planted seeds for a different future. Employees like Isabella Lopez and Marcus Brown, once dismissed and demeaned, finally received long-overdue promotions. The morale inside Blue Wave began to heal. Andrew Mitchell's downfall, meanwhile, was absolute. His name became a warning in business schools, an example of how arrogance and racism can end not just a career but an entire legacy. Unable to find work in the industry he once dominated, he faded into obscurity, remembered only for the destruction he left behind. Angela's story, however, became something far greater. She stood before graduation ceremonies and community groups, her voice steady as she spoke about resilience, dignity, and the power of rising above prejudice. At one commencement, she told a crowd of young graduates, "My greatest revenge wasn't destroying a man. It was proving that no prejudice could define me. What defines us is our determination and the courage to rise higher than the barriers placed in front of us." Her words carried across the auditorium, sparking thunderous applause, but also something deeper, reflection. This story wasn't just about one woman, one company, or one act of cruelty. It was about the countless voices across workplaces, schools, and neighborhoods who endure similar injustice but are silenced before they can speak. It was about the systems that protect the powerful and dismiss the marginalized. And it was about what happens when even one person refuses to accept invisibility. Angela's journey reminds us that racism in corporate spaces is not a relic of the past. It is a present, persistent reality. But it also shows that silence is never the only option. By refusing to break, by gathering proof, and by choosing the moment to act, she not only reclaimed her own dignity but also forced a company and a country to confront uncomfortable truths. As the lights dim on this story, the question lingers. How many Angelas are still out there, working in silence, waiting for their chance to be seen? And when their moment comes, will we be ready to listen? Because in the end, this was never just about one janitor who solved an equation. It was about a society that must decide whether to continue burying brilliance under prejudice, or to finally recognize that greatness can rise from anywhere, even from the woman pushing a mop through glass-walled corridors. So, the next time you pass by someone society overlooks, ask yourself, are you seeing them for who they are, or only for the role the world has assigned them? The answer to that question might just decide whether we build barriers or break them. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on Angela's journey. She wasn't meant to be seen, yet her brilliance and resilience exposed the truth and changed everything. What do you think was the most powerful moment? When she solved the problem, when she stood silent in the face of humiliation, or when justice finally caught up to Andrew? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories that uncover hidden struggles and triumphs like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.